Mahatma Gandhi on Satyagraha. It is said of passive resistance that it is a weapon of the weak. This power is not passive resistance. Indeed, it calls for intense activity. The movement in South Africa was not passive, but active. Satyagraha is not a physical force. A satyagrahi does not inflict pain on the adversary. He does not seek his destruction. In the use of satyagraha, there is no ill will whatsoever. Satyagraha is pure soul force. Truth is the very substance of the soul. That is why this force is called satyagraha. The soul is informed with knowledge. In it burns the flame of love. Non-violence is the supreme dharma. With these words of Gandhi, dear students, I welcome you to another session. In this session, we will look at the Indian national movement and the role of Gandhi in championing a new era in world politics. Satyagraha and non-violence as a concept were discussed in the previous session. We shall listen to the story of Gandhi's return to India, his role in non-cooperation and civil disobedience movements. By discussing concepts, principles, and examples of practical implementation of satyagraha and non-violence, we shall also understand the story of the fight for Indian independence. Shaking the roots of the racist regime in South Africa with a novel method of mass agitation, which he called satyagraha, Gandhi returned to India in 1915. A hero's welcome awaited Gandhi when he landed on January 9, 1915, at the Apollo Bandar in Bombay. In no hurry to enter politics, Gandhi's political mentor, Gokhale, advised him to refrain from expressing himself upon public questions for a year, which was to be a year of probation. This restraint was due to self-imposed silence and partly to the fact that he was still studying conditions in India. He received a Kaisar-e-Hind Gold Medal in the King's Birthday Honours list. Satyagraha stressed on the power of truth and the need to search for truth. If the cause was true, if the struggle was against injustice, then physical force was not necessary to fight the oppressor, is the gist of the idea of satyagraha. Without vengeance or aggression, a satyagrahi could win the battle through non-violence. This could be done by appealing to the conscience of the oppressor. Truth was bound to ultimately triumph. Gandhi believed that the idea of non-violence could unite all Indians. After arriving in India, Mahatma Gandhi successfully organized satyagraha movements in various places. In the year 1916, he travelled to Champaran in Bihar to inspire the peasants to struggle against the oppressive plantation system. Pursuing a strategy of non-violent protest, Gandhi took the administration by surprise and won concessions from the authorities. Then in 1917, he organized a satyagraha to support the peasants of the Kheda district of Gujarat. Affected by crop failure and a plague epidemic, the peasants of Kheda could not pay the revenue and were demanding that the revenue collection be relaxed. The government gave way on important provisions and relaxed the conditions of payment of revenue tax until the famine ended. In Kheda, Vallabhbhai Patel represented the farmers in negotiations with the British, who suspended revenue collection and released all the prisoners. In 1918, Mahatma Gandhi went to Ahmedabad to organize a satyagraha movement amongst cotton mill workers. 1919 was a phenomenal year. It saw the Rowlatt Act being introduced in India. Gandhiji decided to launch a nationwide satyagraha against the proposed Rowlatt Act. This act gave the government powers to repress political activities and gave powers to detain political prisoners without trial for 2 years. A non-violent civil disobedience movement against this law would start with a hartal on 6th of April. Rallies were organized in various cities. Workers went on strike in railway workshops. The British administration decided to crack down on the nationalists. Mahatma Gandhi was barred from entering Delhi. On 10th April, the police in Amritsar fired upon a peaceful procession, provoking widespread attacks on banks, post offices, and railway stations. Martial law was imposed and General Dyer took command. On 13th April, a large crowd gathered in the enclosed ground of Jallianwala Bagh. Many villages were unaware of the martial law that had been imposed. Dyer blocked the exit points and opened fire on the crowd. His object, as he declared later, was to produce a moral effect, to create in the minds of satyagrahis a feeling of terror and awe. As the news of Jallianwala Bagh spread, crowds took to the streets in many North Indian towns. There were strikes, clashes with the police, and attacks on government buildings. The government responded with brutal repression, seeking to humiliate and terrorize people. Satyagrahis were forced to rub their noses on the ground, crawl on the streets, and do salam to all sahibs. People were flogged, and villages, especially surrounding Pakistan, were bombed. Seeing violence spread, Mahatma Gandhi decided to call off the movement. While the Rowlatt Act had been a widespread movement, it was still limited mostly to cities and towns. Mahatma Gandhi now felt the need to launch a more broad-based movement in India, but he was certain that no such movement could be organized without bringing the Hindus and the Muslims closer together. One way of doing this, he felt, was to take up the Khilafat issue. The First World War had ended with the defeat of Ottoman Turkey, and there were rumors that a harsh peace treaty was going to be imposed on the Ottoman Emperor, the spiritual head of the Islamic world, the Khalifa. To defend the Khalifa's temporal powers, a Khilafat committee was formed in Bombay in March 1919. A young generation of Muslim leaders like the brothers Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali began discussing with the Mahatma the possibility of a united mass action on the issue. Gandhi saw this as an opportunity to bring Muslims under the umbrella of a united national movement. At the Calcutta session of the Congress in September 1920, he convinced the other leaders of the need to start a non-cooperation movement in support of Khilafat as well as for Swaraj. In his book Hind Swaraj, written in 1909, Mahatma Gandhi declared that the British rule was established and succeeded in India with the cooperation of the Indians. If Indians refused to cooperate, British rule in India would collapse within a year and Swaraj would come. How could non-cooperation become a movement? Gandhiji proposed that the movement should unfold in stages. It should begin with the surrender of titles that the government awarded and a boycott of civil services, army, police, courts and legislative councils, schools and foreign goods. Then, in the case the government used repression, a full civil disobedience campaign would be launched. Through the summer of 1920, Mahatma Gandhi and Shaukat Ali toured extensively, mobilizing popular support for the movement. Many within the Congress were, however, concerned about the proposal. They were reluctant to boycott the council elections scheduled for November 1920, and they feared that the movement might lead to popular violence. In the months between September and December, there was an intense tussle within the Congress. At the Congress session at Nagpur in 1920, a compromise was worked out and the non-cooperation program was adopted in the countryside. From the cities, the non-cooperation movement spread to the countryside. It drew into its fold the struggles of peasants and tribals, new worlds, a form of demonstration or protest by which people block the entrance to a shop, factory or office. In Awadh, peasants were led by Baba Ramachandra, a sannyasi who had earlier been to Fiji as an indentured labourer. The movement here was against talukdars and landlords who demanded from peasants exorbitantly high rents and a variety of other cesses. Peasants had to beggar and work at landlords' farms without any payment. As tenants, they had no security of tenure, being regularly evicted so that they could acquire no right over the leased land. The peasant movement demanded reduction of revenue, abolition of beggar, and social boycott of oppressive landlords. In many places, Nai-Dhobi bands were organized by panchayats to deprive landlords of the services of even barbers and washermen. In June 1920, Jawaharlal Nehru began going around the villages in Awadh, talking to the villagers and trying to understand their grievances. By October, the Awadh Kisan Sabha was set up, headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, Baba Ramachandra and a few others. Within a month, over 300 branches had been set up in the villages around the region. So when the non-cooperation movement began the following year, the effort of the Congress was to integrate the Awadh peasant struggle into the wider struggle. The peasant movement, however, developed in forms that the Congress leadership was unhappy with. As the movement spread in 1921, the houses of talukdars and merchants were attacked, bazaars were looted, and grain hoards were taken over. In many places, local leaders told peasants that Gandhiji had declared that no taxes were to be paid and land was to be redistributed among the poor. The name of the Mahatma was being invoked to sanction all action and aspirations. Tribal peasants interpreted the message of Mahatma Gandhi and the idea of Swaraj differently. In the Gudem hills of Andhra Pradesh, for instance, a militant guerrilla movement spread in the early 1920s, not a form of struggle that the Congress could approve. Here, as in the other forest regions, the colonial government had closed large forest areas, preventing people from entering the forests to graze their cattle or to collect fuel wood and fruits. This enraged the hill people. Not only were their livelihoods affected, but they felt that their traditional rights were being denied. When the government began forcing them to contribute begar for road building, the hill people revolted. The person who came to lead them was an interesting figure. Alluri Sitaram Raju claimed that he had a variety of special powers. He could make correct astrological predictions, heal people, and he could even survive bullet shots. Captivated by Raju, the rebels proclaimed that he was the incarnation of God. Raju talked of the greatness of Mahatma Gandhi and said that he was inspired by the non-cooperation movement, and he also persuaded people to wear khadi and give up drinking. But at the same time, he asserted that India could be liberated only by the use of force, not non-violence. The Gudem rebels attacked police stations, attempted to kill British officials, and carried on guerrilla warfare for achieving Swaraj. Raju was captured and executed in 1924, and over time became a folk hero. Swaraj for the plantation workers meant something else. For plantation workers in Assam, freedom meant the right to move freely in and out of the confined space in which they were enclosed, and it meant retaining a link with the village from which they had come. Under the Inland Emigration Act of 1859, plantation workers were not permitted to leave the tea gardens without permission, and in fact, they were rarely given such permission. When they heard of the non-cooperation movement, thousands of workers defied the authorities, left the plantations and headed home. They believed that Gandhi was coming and Gandhi Raj was coming, and everyone would be given land in their own villages. They, however, never reached their destination. Stranded on the way by the railway and steamer strike, they were caught by the police and brutally beaten up. The visions of these movements were not defined by the Congress program. They interpreted the term Swaraj in their own ways, imagining it to be a time when all suffering and all troubles would be over. Yet, when the tribals chanted Gandhiji's name and raised slogans demanding Swatantra Bharat, they were also emotionally relating to an all-India agitation. That is the legacy of Gandhi. When they acted in the name of Mahatma Gandhi, that of the Congress, they were identifying with a movement which went beyond the limits of their immediate locality. In February 1922, Mahatma Gandhi decided to withdraw the non-cooperation movement. He felt that the movement was turning violent in many places and satyagrahis needed to be properly trained before they would be ready for mass struggles. Within the Congress, some leaders were by now tired of the mass struggles and wanted to participate in elections to the provincial councils that had been set up by the Government of India Act of 1919. They felt that it was important to oppose British policies within the councils, argue for reform and also demonstrate that these councils were not truly democratic. C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru formed the Swaraj Party within the Congress to argue for a return to council politics. But younger leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose pressed for more radical mass agitation and for full independence. In such a situation of internal debate and dissension, two factors again shaped Indian politics towards the late 1920s. The first was the effect of the worldwide economic depression. Agricultural prices began to fall from 1926 and collapsed after 1930. As the demand for agricultural goods fell and exports declined, peasants found it difficult to sell their harvests and pay their revenue. By 1930, the countryside was in turmoil. Against this background, the new Tory government in Britain constituted a statutory commission under Sir John Simon. Set up in response to the nationalist movement, the commission was to look into the functioning of the constitutional system in India and suggest changes. The problem was that the commission did not have a single Indian member. They were all British. When the Simon Commission arrived in India in 1928, it was greeted with the slogan, "Go back, Simon." All the parties, including the Congress and the Muslim League, participated in the demonstrations. In an effort to win them over, the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, announced in October 1929 a vague offer of dominion status for India in an unspecified future and a roundtable conference to discuss a future constitution. This did not satisfy the Congress leaders. The radicals within the Congress became more assertive. The liberals and moderates who were proposing a constitutional system within the framework of British dominion gradually lost their influence. In December 1929, under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Lahore Congress formalized the demand for Purna Swaraj, or full independence for India. It was declared that 26 January 1930 would be celebrated as the Independence Day, when people were to take a pledge to struggle for complete independence. But the celebrations attracted very little attention. So Mahatma Gandhi had to find a way to relate this abstract idea of freedom to more concrete issues of everyday life. The Salt March and the Civil Disobedience Movement. Mahatma Gandhi found in salt a powerful symbol that could unite the entire nation. On 31st January 1930, he sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin stating 11 demands. Some of these were of general interest, others were specific demands of different classes. from industrialists to peasants. The idea was to make the demands wide-ranging so that all classes within Indian society could identify with them and everyone could be brought together in a united campaign. The most stirring of all the demand was to abolish the salt tax. Salt was something consumed by the rich and the poor alike, and it was one of the most essential items of food. The tax on salt and the government monopoly over its production, Mahatma Gandhi declared, revealed the most oppressive phase of the British rule. Mahatma Gandhi's letter was, in a way, an ultimatum. If the demands were not fulfilled by 11th March, the letter stated, the Congress would launch a civil disobedience campaign. Irwin was unwilling to negotiate, so Mahatma Gandhi started his famous Salt March accompanied by 78 of his trusted volunteers. The march was over 240 miles from Gandhiji's ashram in Sabarmati to Gujarat, a coastal town of Dundee. The volunteers walked for 24 days, about 10 miles a day. Thousands came to hear whatever Mahatma Gandhi said, and he told them what he meant by Swaraj and urged them to peacefully defy the British. On 6th April, he reached Dundee and unceremoniously violated the law, manufacturing salt by boiling seawater. This marked the beginning of the civil disobedience movement. How was this movement different from the non-cooperation movement? People were now asked not only to refuse cooperation, as they had done in 1921, but also to break colonial laws. Thousands in different parts of the country broke the salt law, manufactured salt, and demonstrated in front of government salt factories. As the movement spread, foreign cloth was boycotted and liquor shops were picketed. Peasants refused to pay revenue and chowkidari taxes. Village officials resigned, and in many places, forest people violated forest laws, going into reserve forests to collect wood and graze cattle. Worried by the developments, the colonial government began arresting the Congress leaders. This led to violent clashes in many places. When Mahatma Gandhi himself was arrested, industrial workers in Sholapur attacked police posts, municipal buildings, law courts and railway stations, all structures that symbolize British rule. A frightened government responded with a policy of brutal repression. Peaceful satyagrahis were attacked, women and children were beaten, and about 100,000 people were arrested. In such a situation, Mahatma Gandhi once again decides to call off the movement and entered into a pact with Irwin on 5th March 1931. By this Gandhi-Irwin pact, Gandhiji consented to participate in a round-table conference. In December 1931, Gandhiji went to London for the conference, but the negotiations broke down and he returned disappointed. Back in India, he discovered that the government had begun a new cycle of repression. Ghaffar Khan and Jawaharlal Nehru were both in jail, and the Congress had been declared illegal. A series of measures had been imposed to prevent meetings, demonstrations, and boycotts. With great apprehension, Mahatma Gandhi relaunched the civil disobedience movement. For over a year, the movement continued, but by 1934, it lost its momentum. Not all social groups were moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. One such group was the nation's untouchables, who from around the 1930s had begun to call themselves Dalit or oppressed. For long, the Congress had ignored the Dalits for fear of offending the Sanataris, the conservative, high-caste Hindus. But Mahatma Gandhi declared that Swaraj would not come for 100 years if untouchability was not eliminated. He called the untouchables Harijan. Why did various classes and groups of Indians participate in the civil disobedience movement? That's a question for us to ponder. During the national movement, many women, for the first time in their lives, moved out of their homes and onto a public arena. Amongst the marchers, we can see many old women and mothers with children in their arms. Gandhiji called the untouchables Harijans or children of God. He organized satyagraha to secure them entry into temples and access to public wells, tanks, roads and schools. He himself cleaned toilets to dignify the work of the bhangi, the sweepers, and persuaded upper castes to change their heart and give up the sin of untouchability. But many Dalit leaders were keen on a different political solution to the problem of the community. They began organizing themselves, demanding reserved seats in educational institutions and a separate electorate that would choose Dalit members for legislative councils. Political empowerment, they believed, would resolve the problems of their social disabilities. Dalit participation in the civil disobedience movement was therefore limited, particularly in the Maharashtra and Nagpur region, where their organization was quite strong. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalits into the Depressed Classes Association in 1930, clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Round Table Conference by demanding separate electorates for Dalits. When the British government conceded Ambedkar's demand, Gandhiji began a fast on to death. He believed that separate electorates for Dalits would slow down the process of their integration into society. Ambedkar ultimately accepted Gandhi's position and result was the Pune Pact of September 1932. It gave the depressed classes, later to be known as the scheduled castes, reserved seats in provincial and central legislative councils, but they were to be voted by the general electorate. The Dalit movement, however, continued to be apprehensive of the Congress-led national movement. A growing anger against the colonial government was thus bringing together various groups and classes of Indians into a common first half of the 20th century. The Congress, under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, tried to channel people's grievances into organized movements for independence. Though such movements, the nationalists tried to forge a national union. But as we have seen, diverse groups and classes participated in these movements with varied aspirations and expectations. As their grievances were wide-ranging, freedom from colonial rule also meant different things to different people. Generations to come will scarcely believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth. In this session, we will have looked at the Indian national movement and the role of Gandhi in implementing satyagraha and non-violence as a practical concept. We have listened to the story of Gandhi's return to India, his role in non-cooperation and civil disobedience movements. By discussing concepts, principles and examples of practical implementation of satyagraha and non-violence, we have attempted to revisit the story of Indian independence. Thank you.